Rain fell in slow silver sheets across the Wyoming plain as the ranch house loomed against the gray. Inside, the lamps flickered low, and Cole Merrick, 40, widowed, and worn to bone by years of silence, stood staring at the figure on his porch. She was soaked through to the skin, her faded calico dress clinging to her shape, her hands gripping a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Her face was plain and round, cheeks red from cold, hair plastered against her temples. Yet, when she spoke, her voice carried steady as the rain. "I ain't pretty, sir, but I can cook." Cole's jaw tensed at the boldness of it, the kind that came from survival, not pride. He'd seen many women pass through town, most too proud or too fearful to work for a man like him. Quiet, scarred, and alone. But this one didn't flinch under his stare. "Name's Lottie Mayfield," she added, her chin lifting a little. "Mrs. Whittle from the Mercantile said you needed someone to keep house. I can make a stew out of near anything that still breathes, and I ain't afraid of work." The sound of thunder rolled far off as Cole pushed open the door wider. "You travel far?" he asked. "3 days on the mail wagon, last mile on foot," she said, stepping inside, careful not to drip on the wood floor. The warmth hit her face and drew a small sigh from her lips, soft and human. Cole nodded toward the hearth. "Set your things by the fire." "Supper's half done." She looked at the iron pot simmering on the stove and smiled faintly. "Looks like it needs salt." Her boldness tugged at the corner of his mouth before he caught himself. "Then let me learn you too," he said quietly, surprising them both. The words hung between them like a promise neither had planned to make. Lottie's eyes softened, and she took the wooden spoon from his hand as if it were an offering. The scent of onions and venison rose as she stirred, her movements sure and practiced. Outside, rain beat against the roof, but inside the little cabin, something shifted. Two strangers, both tired of hunger that had nothing to do with food, finding warmth in a single shared silence. Cole watched her in the firelight, the curve of her wrist, the steadiness of her breath, and for the first time in years, the empty house felt like it might remember what comfort was. By morning the storm had passed, leaving the earth smelling of rain and pine. Lottie was already up, sleeves rolled and hair tied with a bit of string, humming softly as she kneaded dough on the long pine table. Cole paused in the doorway, boots half-laced, watching her work the flour with sure, rhythmic hands. He wasn't used to sound in the mornings, only the scrape of chair legs and the slow breath of the fire. But her quiet tune filled the cabin like something long forgotten. "Didn't figure you'd rise before the rooster," he said gruffly. "Rooster don't bake bread," she answered without looking up. Her tone wasn't sharp, just matter-of-fact. The scent of yeast and wood smoke mingled as she lifted her head, eyes catching his. "You got any honey? Bread's better with sweet on it, even if the day ain't." Cole found himself smiling despite the stiffness in his chest. "Cupboard left of the stove." She found the jar, dipped a finger, and tasted. "From your hives?" "Had bees once," he said, pouring coffee. "Left after the fire 2 summers back." Her brow furrowed. "Lost someone?" He nodded once, not trusting words. His wife had died in that same blaze, and though he'd rebuilt the walls, the quiet never left. Lottie didn't press him. She just went back to her dough, her silence steady and kind. By the time the bread was in the oven, sunlight had spread across the worn floorboards, and the cabin smelled like something alive again. Cole took his coffee to the porch, but she followed with a plate and a small smile. "Eat while it's hot, Mr. Merrick." "Can't build a fence on an empty belly." He took the slice from her, still steaming, butter melting at the edges. The first bite startled him. It tasted of care. "You weren't lying," he said, chewing slowly. "No, sir," she said. "I don't lie about food or work." She wiped her hands on her apron and looked out at the pasture. "I don't lie about men either. You give me a roof and respect, I'll make this house feed your soul same as your stomach." Her words weren't boastful, just plain truth, and Cole felt a strange warmth rise behind his ribs. "Respect's easy," he said finally. "Roof's already here. The rest, we'll see." He went back to his coffee, pretending not to watch her gather eggs by the fence, but the thought wouldn't leave him. How a stranger could fill silence better than any prayer. By the end of the week, the ranch hands had started whispering. It was a sound Cole knew too well, the kind that didn't carry truth, only small-minded noise. Lottie worked from dawn to dark without complaint, cooking 3 meals, mending torn shirts, keeping the ranch's heart beating like a clock. Yet the men talked anyway. "Ain't right," one muttered by the water trough. "A woman like that living up in the main house? No ring, no kin." Another laughed, low and cruel. "Merrick's gone soft. Guess he likes his biscuits thick, and his women thicker." They didn't know Lottie was near the barn, gathering feed sacks. The words reached her clear as a slap. Her hands froze mid-motion, eyes fixed on the ground. Shame burned her cheeks, not for what they said, but for how easily cruel tongues tried to ruin what little peace she'd found. Cole saw her on the porch later, shoulders squared but trembling slightly. "What happened?" he asked. "Just wind," she said softly. "Carrion words don't matter." But her eyes betrayed the hurt. Cole didn't push. Instead, at supper, he sat among the same men who'd been whispering. When the room fell quiet, he spoke without raising his voice. "Any man on my land eats the food she makes, keeps his mouth shut while he does it. If that don't suit, gates wide open." The scrape of chairs echoed. Nobody looked up. Only Lottie's hand paused mid-stir at the stove, a single tear falling where no one could see. That night, Cole found her outside hanging laundry under a pale moon. "You shouldn't have done that," she murmured. "Now they'll call me the reason you turned mean." "They can call me what they want," he said, "but they won't call you less than you are." She looked at him, the lamplight from the window catching her face, softening the weariness. "And what am I, Mr. Merrick?" He stepped closer, close enough to see the freckles across her nose, the small scar above her lip. "A woman who's earned her place here by work and heart. That's worth more than all their talk." Her throat moved as she swallowed hard. "You keep saying things like that, and I'll start believing I belong." "Maybe that's what I want," he said quietly. The wind tugged at her apron strings, and for a moment, neither moved. The stars above stretched endless and quiet, and in that stillness, something unspoken rooted between them. Steady, simple, and growing stronger than rumor. The following Friday, a wagon rumbled up the dirt road just as Lottie pulled a loaf from the oven. Cole was out in the pasture, but she heard the wheels long before she saw them. Uneven, like one spoke was cracked. When the door swung open, the smell of city tobacco filled her kitchen. A man stepped inside without waiting to be asked, hat low, smile thinner than river ice. "Ain't you gonna say hello, Lottie?" Her heart sank before memory even found his name. Wade Turner, once a hired hand in the same mill where she'd worked before heading west. Once the man who'd promised her a wedding, then left with another woman's savings. "You best turn around and ride back to town," she said, her voice steady but her knuckles white on the counter. "This ain't your business no more." He leaned against the door frame, smirking. "Heard you found yourself a rich rancher to keep you. Thought maybe he'd like to know you ain't the innocent housekeeper you play at. Lottie's jaw set hard. "You'll not spread that poison here." Behind them, boots thudded on the porch. Cole's shadow filled the doorway. His expression was unreadable, eyes hard beneath the brim of his hat. "Problem?" he asked. "No problem," Wade said smoothly, though his shoulders stiffened. "Just remindin' your lady friend where she came from." Cole stepped forward, close enough for the air to grow taut. "Where she came from's none of my concern. Where she's goin' is—" Wade scoffed. "You don't know her like I do. I know her well enough to see you're the kind that leaves scars." Cole's voice dropped lower, the kind that didn't need to rise to be dangerous. "You get off my land now, or I'll make sure you remember what no sounds like when it comes from a man." For a long breath, no one moved. Then Wade glanced at Lottie, sneering one last time before backing toward the wagon. "This ain't over," he muttered. The sound of the wheels faded down the road. Lottie stood frozen, one hand pressed to her apron, the other trembling at her side. "I didn't want you to see that part of me," she whispered. Cole stepped closer. "The part that got hurt?" She nodded, tears welling. "The part that learned not to trust kindness." He touched her chin, gentle as breath. "Kindness ain't weakness, Lottie. And you don't owe anyone shame for surviving." Her eyes searched his, and the wall she'd built so carefully began to crack. "You don't even know what I've done." "Then let me learn you too," he said, echoing his first words to her, soft but full of promise. She smiled through tears, and when he turned back to his work, she watched him long after he was gone, wondering how a man who'd sworn he couldn't love again could already see her clearer than anyone ever had. By Monday morning, word had reached town and come crawling back again, twisted and ugly. Wade Turner's poison spread faster than wildfire. By the time Cole rode into town for supplies, he felt it in every sidelong glance and half-muttered comment. "You heard?" the blacksmith whispered to a customer. "That new housekeeper he took in ain't no widow at all. Some fallen woman from the mills." Cole's hand clenched around the reins until his knuckles blanched, but he said nothing. He finished his errands in silence, jaw tight, and when he mounted up, he could still hear the laughter echoing behind him. Back at the ranch, Lottie was hanging sheets in the sun, pretending not to notice the way the ranch hands had grown quiet around her again. The air between them had turned brittle. When Cole approached, she didn't look up right away. "He's been talking, hasn't he?" she asked finally. "Town was built on talk," he said, "and it'll die on it too." She smiled sadly, pinning the last sheet. "Doesn't make the living any easier." He studied her face, the way she fought to stay upright under something invisible but heavy. "You didn't deserve this," he said. "I've had worse," she replied, "but you don't have to stand in it with me." That was the moment he realized she still thought she was alone. That night, he saddled his horse and rode back to town under a bruised sky. The saloon was half full, the kind of place where lies fermented quick. Wade was there, loud with whiskey. "You hear what Merrick's keeping up at his place?" he jeered. "Says she can cook, but I reckon she's serving more than stew." Laughter rolled through the room, right up until Cole's fist found Wade's jaw. Chairs toppled, glasses shattered. Cole stood over him, breathing hard. "You don't say her name again?" he warned. "You don't think her name again?" He left before anyone could stop him, his knuckles bleeding but his conscience clean. The ride home was long and silent, the wind cold against his face. When he reached the cabin, Lottie was waiting by the porch, lantern in hand. Her eyes found his swollen hand, then his face. "What did you do?" "What needed doing," he said simply. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "No one's ever stood for me before." Cole's throat tightened. Then no one ever saw you write. She reached out, her fingers brushing the back of his hand, tracing the bruises with tenderness that hurt worse than the blows. Why would you fight for me when you owe me nothing? She asked. Because I don't fight for debts, Lottie. I fight for what's mine. The words slipped out before he could take them back, and when she looked up, he didn't see fear, only the soft, stunned look of a woman beginning to believe she was finally worth defending. By the next dawn, clouds piled thick and dark over the ridge, heavy with the kind of rain that came once a season and washed the world clean. Or buried it. Lottie packed before sunrise. She moved quietly, folding her few dresses, wrapping her cooking spoon in cloth as if it were sacred. Cole was out mending the fence, unaware of the war raging inside his house. She paused by the stove where last night's fire still glowed faintly, her fingers brushing the cast-iron pot she'd seasoned herself. Everything in this cabin carried her touch now, but she'd convinced herself that leaving was mercy. She couldn't let him carry her shame. When the first thunder cracked, Cole turned from the pasture and saw the wagon at the gate, the mare hitched clumsily. He dropped the hammer, his gut twisting. Lottie! The wind swallowed her name as he ran, boots kicking up wet earth. She froze at the sight of him, rain streaking down his face, hair plastered to his brow. Don't, he said, breath rough. Don't go. She kept her eyes on the reins. You fought a man for me. Now they'll call you worse than what they called me. You'll lose your standing, Cole. Let 'em talk, he said. I've been alone long enough to know silence can kill faster than gossip. Lightning split the sky, and thunder followed like a warning. She shook her head. You don't understand. Wade. He weren't lying entirely. I lived with him once. Thought we'd marry, thought I was worth something. He left me in the street with nothing but a name folks spat after. You deserve better than a woman with that kind of past. Cole stepped closer, his boots sinking in the mud. You think I care about what some coward did? You've been carrying his sin like it's yours. She blinked, tears mixing with rain. It's the only story they know. Then we write a new one, he said. He reached up, slow, hand hovering near her cheek until she didn't pull away. You cook, you work, you make this place live again. You're the bravest soul I've ever met, and I'm done letting the world tell you otherwise. The wagon horse snorted as lightning flashed again, spooking in the mud. Cole steadied the reins, voice steady now. You said you could make a meal out of nothing. Well, you've gone and made a man out of one, too. The words broke something open in her. She dropped the reins, sobbing once, then threw her arms around him as the storm came down in sheets. He held her tight, his jaw against her hair, both shaking in the cold, but standing firm in the middle of that wild rain. The sky roared, the wind tore at their clothes, yet all that remained was warmth, the kind that burns steady after everything else is washed away. When she finally whispered, "What now?" he answered without hesitation. Now we start again, inside, where it's dry. She laughed through tears, and for the first time since the fire that took his wife, Cole Merrick felt like a man being pulled back to life. The storm left the land heavy and gleaming, puddles reflecting a silver sky. The next morning Cole was already in the field, the fence half down and the ground soft as dough beneath his boots. We'll lose half the cattle if I don't mend it by sundown, he said, tightening his gloves. Lottie stood on the porch, hair still damp from washing, apron pressed to her stomach. You ain't healed from yesterday's fight, she warned. You can't wrestle God's mud alone. He gave her a tired grin. I'll manage. Been doing it my whole life, she frowned. Maybe that's the problem. He laughed once and walked out, his figure swallowed by mist. By noon, the sky broke again with low thunder, and Lottie's worry grew sharper. She stirred stew on the stove, but kept glancing through the rain-streaked window. When she saw his horse return riderless, her heart dropped. "Cole." She ran into the field, skirts heavy with mud. She found him near the ravine, pinned under a collapsed rail, blood streaking his arm. He was awake but pale, gritting his teeth as he tried to lift it. "Guess the fence won that round," he muttered through pain. "Don't you dare joke," she snapped, kneeling beside him. Rain soaked them both as she wedged her shoulder under the beam, straining till her muscles screamed. "You can't," he gasped, but she did, inch by inch, until the weight shifted just enough for him to crawl free. When he collapsed against her, she caught him, trembling. "Fool man," she whispered, tears mixing with the rain. "I told you you ain't made of iron." He smiled weakly. "Never said I was." "That's your job." She half dragged, half carried him to the porch, her clothes torn, hands shaking, but she never let him fall. Inside, she cleaned the wound with steady care. The scent of carbolic filled the air, sharp and clean. When she finished bandaging him, he caught her wrist gently. "You should have let me be," he said, voice rough. "And let the rain take you?" she shot back. "Not while I'm breathing." He watched her then, the way her damp hair clung to her temples, the small scar on her chin catching the firelight. "You could have run when I fell," he murmured. "Instead, you came running back." "I've done enough running in this life," she said softly. "Ain't leaving the one place that finally feels steady." The fire crackled, throwing amber light across her face, and something deep in his chest gave way. "You saved me, Lottie." "You'd have done the same," she whispered. He shook his head, smiling faintly. "Maybe. But I wouldn't have looked near as fine doing it." Her laugh came quiet and shaky, and when she reached up to brush hair from his forehead, his hand covered hers. For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm outside faded to a whisper, but the warmth between them burned brighter than the fire itself. For 3 days, Cole couldn't leave the bed. His arm was bound tight, his pride tighter. Lottie kept the house, the fields, and the men running like a clock wound by will alone. At dawn, she was in the barn, sleeves rolled, hitching the plow horse herself. By noon, she was at the trough, barking orders to ranch hands twice her size. "Fence posts north of the ridge," she said, her voice sharp as a nail. "You wait for Cole to heal, we'll be fixing ghosts." They obeyed her. Maybe because of the look in her eyes, maybe because no one else had ever cared if this ranch stood or fell. From the window, Cole watched her move across the yard, small but unbreakable, the raincoat whipping behind her like a banner. He'd never seen anything so steady, so alive. By the time the sun broke through, the field shimmered gold, and Lottie stood at its center, breathing hard, her face streaked with sweat and dust. That night she served stew again, rich and smoky. "Fence is fixed," she said. "You can thank me later." Cole smiled, one arm in a sling. "You'll never let me forget it." "Not a chance." She set the bowl before him, her fingers brushing his wrist, a small charge sparking where skin met skin. They ate in quiet warmth, but peace never lasted long in a town that thrived on tongues. The next morning, Sheriff Dugan rode up, tipping his hat politely but avoiding Lottie's eyes. "Got a matter of concern?" he said. "Wade Turner's been in my office claiming Cole's keeping a woman of questionable virtue." Cole's jaw hardened. "Wade's lucky he's still breathing after the last time." The sheriff sighed. "Folks talk, Merrick." "Church ladies are stirring a petition. They want her gone." Lottie's hands tightened around the spoon she held. "Guess I ain't surprised." Town never liked women who work harder than men. Cole stood, grimacing at the pull in his arm. She ain't going anywhere. Don't make this harder, Dugan warned. There's rules. There's decency, Cole cut in. And I'll stand by that before I bow to gossip. The sheriff tipped his hat again, uneasy. I'll tell him what you said. But I can't promise peace. When he rode off, silence hung heavy. Lottie turned to Cole, voice trembling. You keep fighting battles that ain't yours. Ain't yours either, he said. They just made you carry 'em. Her eyes softened, and she nodded slowly. Then maybe it's time we both stopped letting other folks decide who we are. That night, she sat by the fire, repairing his torn coat while he dozed. Her hands moved slow, steady, and her thoughts turned to something new. Not the leaving she'd planned, but the staying she'd started to believe in. Outside, the wind howled over the hills. But inside the cabin, she felt anchored for the first time in her life. Not by a man's favor, but by his faith. Sunday came with the weight of judgment hanging thick as dust. The church bell tolled across the valley, each strike sharp as glass. Lottie had decided to stay home, but Cole saddled the horse anyway and stood at her door. If we don't walk through those doors today, he said, we let them own the story. She looked at her worn shoes, her apron folded neat on the chair. They'll stare. Then let 'em see something worth staring at. His voice was steady, and something in it, some mix of defiance and care, made her lift her chin. When they rode into town, heads turned like weather vanes. The whispers started before they reached the steps. That's her. The housekeeper. Shameless. But Lottie didn't flinch. Her hand rested lightly on Cole's good arm as he helped her down. Inside, the church smelled of pine oil and disapproval. Reverend Wilkes cleared his throat when they entered, voice tightening. Mr. Merrick. Miss Lottie Ward, Cole said. My cook. My friend. The murmurs rose behind him. The Reverend hesitated. We welcome all souls, of course, but perhaps today. She belongs here as much as anyone, Cole interrupted. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried. Ain't no sermon worth hearing if it can't stand beside the truth. The Reverend blinked, taken aback. For a long moment, no one moved. Then an older woman near the front, Mrs. Granger, who'd once taken bread from Lottie's kitchen, shifted in her seat and stood. She fed my grandsons when I couldn't, she said quietly. That's God's work if I ever saw it. Another voice rose. She mended the church curtains last month. A murmur rippled through the room. Not all kindness, but not all scorn either. Lottie felt her throat tighten as Cole took her hand, lacing their fingers openly. You folks can talk, he said, but I'll tell you plain. This woman's got more grace in her than any hymn you'll sing today. You don't have to like her, but you'll respect her while I'm standing. The silence that followed was deep enough to hear the wind outside. The Reverend cleared his throat again. Then, let's pray. They sat in the last pew, her hand still trembling in his. During the hymn, she couldn't bring herself to sing, but when the sun cut through the high window and caught Cole's face, she saw peace there, a quiet she hadn't seen since she'd met him. Outside, when the service ended, people walked by slow, uncertain. A few nodded. One woman pressed a small loaf into Lottie's hands. For supper, she said softly. When the last carriage rolled away, Lottie whispered, You shouldn't have done that. Too late, he said with a crooked grin. You're already the talk of the town. She laughed once, a sound light as relief. You sure about this, Cole Merrick? Only thing I've been sure of since my wife died, he said. I ain't letting shame steal another good woman from my life. And as they walked back toward the waiting horse, side by side under the bright noon sky, the world suddenly felt less cruel. Like maybe, just maybe, decency could still make its own kind of noise. The air that evening carried a quiet that felt earned. The sun slipped low behind the hills, throwing gold light across the fields Lottie had helped save, across the house that finally felt alive again. She stood at the stove, stirring stew slow, the wooden spoon moving like a rhythm she'd known her whole life. Cole sat near the window, his arms still bound, but his heart lighter than he could ever recall. "You're humming again," he said softly. She smiled without turning. "Guess I forgot how it felt." "Sounds like home," he said. The words caught her off guard. She set the spoon down and turned, her hands brushing the apron she no longer needed as armor. "You shouldn't say things like that, Cole Merrick. A woman starts believing." He rose carefully, crossing the few steps between them. "That's the idea." She met his gaze, eyes glistening with something she didn't yet trust. "You don't owe me this," she whispered. "You took me in when the world wouldn't. You fought for me when I wouldn't fight for myself. That's more than enough." He shook his head. "You think I did all that for pity?" She looked away, voice small. "Didn't I give you trouble? You gave me something worth waking up for." He took her hand, rough palm closing around hers with gentleness that made her breath catch. "You said once you ain't pretty, but all I see is the woman who fixed this place, fed its people, and taught me what still matters. You said you could cook, Lottie, but you've gone and taught me how to live again." Her eyes filled, tears tracing lines of peace instead of pain. "And what if I ain't done learnin'?" she asked softly. He smiled, voice breaking just a little. "Then let me learn you, too." The words hung there, steady as truth. For the first time, she didn't pull away. She stepped into his arms, resting her head against his chest. His heartbeat was slow, strong, certain, the sound of a man who'd finally stopped running from ghosts. Outside, a cool wind rustled the wheat, and the stars began to blink awake. The world hadn't changed much. People would still talk, wag their tongues, build their fences. But inside that cabin, there was something unshakable, born of labor, of loss, of two souls who'd found their way through shame and storm to stand together in the quiet. When she finally looked up, her voice was steady, sure. "Then I reckon you better get used to second helpings." He laughed, the sound deep and warm, pulling her close again. "Long as it's you serving, I'll never stop." And in that small kitchen, with stew simmering and the scent of bread in the air, they sealed something sacred. Not in words, but in the silence that followed, full of everything they'd both waited a lifetime to hear. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Stories Left Behind. If you had seen her standing there, covered in flour, tears, and pride, would you have told her she was beautiful too? Tell us in the comments.